Hello and greetings, everyone. It's GleeCon back at you again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we ran through some Darkshore quests, some more. It's turning into quite a long zone with our druid. And part of it was because we're doing druid quests on the side. So we ran around and did some of that. We've also been reading the Alliance Player's Guide, and we've really hit the meat of the lore in this book now. We did the Kaldorei, the Night Elf history. And we're going to do a short little episode today where we talk about, it says half-elf history? Oh, high elf history. So a pinch, not too long. Just a few pages, but there's pictures, so a couple pages of text. All right, so stay a while and listen as we dive into high elf history, and now you see that also next time it'll be half elf history. Each race in the Alliance has its own agenda, and we are often bound together out of necessity rather than common interests. I used to have no love for the High Elves, but I've met several during my travels who show almost dwarf-like qualities, and a High Elf priest saved my keister in the Second War. Few High Elves still exist, and I grow increasingly concerned that what the High Elves were, they've lost, and they'll never be again, and I would agree with that. Those we can still call High Elves, or wise at least, and do not attempt to embrace their so-called heritage and join the Blood Elves. However, many High Elves cling to their unique worldview. And in Classic, you still see them. And then like older content, like Burning Crusade content, like there's a couple spots. But it's very rare to even see a High Elf, especially in retail. If you want a frustrating evening, try to discuss High Elf history with an elf without beer close at hand. Most claim that every notable figure in their history was either misguided or misunderstood. Few people in their history were responsible for the chaos that their magic brought to the world. We only recently discovered the truth of the elves' origin. Even the elves seem to have forgotten it until the Night Elves appeared and gave us their view of history. Boy, that was a day to see. You should have seen those High Elf faces. See, all the elves used to be the same. This fact is somewhat odd since they seem so different. Some of them played around with arcane magic too much, and the others stuck with their divine and loon-worshipping ways. After the War of the Ancients, the Night Elves exiled the Highborn. Still insisting that they were hard done by, the High Elves, the descendants of these exiles, tell of their years of nomadic lifestyle, the loss of their immortality, and their eventual settlement of Quel'The the Lost, which is when they adopted the name High Elves. Still dedicated to the arcane arts, the High Elves had no problem in establishing a pool of energy, much like the Night Elves, moonwells. However, they wanted to reject all that was central to Night Elf culture, thus the worship of the moon and the nocturnal ways of the Night Elves had to go. Rejecting Night Elf society as much as they could, naturally, the High Elves chose to name their font of power the Sunwell. After the High Elves settled in their new home, savage troll clans attacked and terrorized the High Elf settlements. The High Elves approached humans, a new but strong race also having trouble with the trolls, and suggested an alliance. The humans were willing, but, well, the humans needed magic, in the High Elves' opinion, to be useful in battle. Thus, the High Elves offered to teach the humans magic. Together, the two races defeated the trolls. Once the trolls were no longer a menace, the two races flourished, the humans sending their brightest students north to learn magic in Quel'The the Lost. And granted, this is a kind of a more recent history compared to the Kalderei's history, because remember what we said on the last reading episode, it wasn't until that group branched off from the Kaldorei that we even get a High Elf history to speak of. The High Elves and humans worked well together, creating a secret magical society called the Order of Tirisfal, designed to be the last defensive power Azeroth would ever need against the Burning Legion. This organization stood strong against demonic incursion for many years. Eventually, though, Aegwynn, a guardian, battled the demon Sargeras. She defeated his physical body, but his dark spirit entered her body. There it lay dormant until Aegwynn eventually conceived Medivh, at which point Sargeras possessed Medivh, who was as yet unborn. Years later, Medivh became a puppet of demons, and he opened the dark portal to allow the Horde into our world where it resides today. The High Elves remained friendly with the humans for the next several years, but only helped out on a small level in the First War, when the Horde first attacked and took Stormwind Keep. After the humans were defeated and fled north through Cosmodon, we dwarves sent emissaries to meet with the High Elves and humans to discuss the threat of the Horde. Together, elves, dwarves, and humans from both Stormwind and Lordaeron created the Alliance the armies strong with the magic of the elves and humans and the sheer firepower and tenacity of the dwarves. In the Second War, the Alliance defeated the Horde, reclaiming most of the human lands and destroying and imprisoning key Horde leaders. Despite our differences, we work quite well together. The High Elves had made a relative paradise in their land of Quel'Thalas, extending the magic of the Sunwell to make the land lush and green. It was a true pleasure to visit. I remember from my early days with the Explorers Guild. The battles of the Second War destroyed much of this land, but the elves swore to rebuild. Their healing of the land was only 2 decades begun when the Third War came to Lordaeron. The pride of the humans, especially the paladin Prince Arthas, became a tool of the Burning Legion. Arthas took his foul undead armies to Quel'Thalas to gain the power to revive the necromancer Kel'Thuzad in the form of an undead lich. Arthas finally razed Quel'Thalas. The slaughter was terrible. Here we have a picture of it. Looks like maybe some Kaldorei fighting some Sindarai. Since then, the High Elves exist in a state of shock. Their home was once again destroyed. Their focus of magic is no more. They depend on the charity of the Alliance, relying more on it than it does on them. A large faction, indeed most of the remaining High Elves, watched the cowed action of their siblings and took matters into their own hands, embracing their arcane dedication and naming themselves Blood Elves in honor of their fallen kin. They split from the Alliance. The Blood Elf Prince Kael'thas made questionable allegiance with Illidan, the demon-tainted Night Elf, but most Blood Elves are unaware of this pact. Can the problems of the last 10,000 years be blamed on the dwarves, the elves, high or otherwise? Some think that yes, they first allowed the Burning Legion into the world and set events in motion that still haunt our lands to this day. They failed to fix the problem, still clinging stubbornly to the belief that they can control their urges, that they're stronger than those who have fallen. Others put the blame on the Burning Legion, saying that the demons were so powerful that no one could withstand their corruption. Humans also felt a demonic influence, as did the orcs. The High Elves simply were duped as well. And few who know their history can deny that if it hadn't been for the High Elves, the human race would not exist today. High Elf culture. High Elf numbers are so diminished by the war and then by the destruction of the Blood Elves that the High Elf race in High Elf society no longer exists as a contemporary concept. High Elves are scattered individuals. Most of them have decided to remain loyal to the Alliance, but that's an individual decision each High Elf makes, not something the race as a whole decides. You can find High Elves anywhere in the world you can find Alliance citizens, although they're rare in northern Kalimdor. Night Elves may allow human, gnomish, and of course dwarven emissaries and ambassadors to visit their forests, but they're more hesitant to welcome a High Elf. The Night Elves attempt to offer the hospitality due to their allies and cousins, but it's clear they do not trust the High Elves. Constantly living with the knowledge of the other races' mistrust, and these are races that are supposed to be their allies, can wear on anyone. However, take this mistrust and throw it at a race that already has a long history of haughty pretentiousness, and it does nothing to knock them down a peg. High Elves distance themselves from the other races. They can find solidarity with other magic users and those who have similar goals, so they aren't complete pariahs, but they're definitely in a bad way. Adventuring with High Elves often proves to be an interesting escapade. When High Elves travel with each other, which is understandably doesn't happen often these days, they are relaxed and amicable, or so they tell me. When traveling with others, they can be standoffish, focused on their own issues. Some are highly defensive when faced with criticism, quick to take offense and quick to judge others. Some High Elves still make names for themselves. Woo! Sorry. Gianni Sunscorch is a diplomat in Theramore. She keeps her eyes clear and watches the tides of power in Theramore move among its races. Then there's Kin Lighteye, a warrior who has tried to turn his back on the magic of his race, but cannot fully deny the addiction in his blood. And that's it. We got a couple sidebars, and we're done. Here's a picture. I can't tell if that's an orc. A dwarf or an old. They look dwarvish. And then maybe a High Elf. Here's a story. Theramore's cobblestones didn't taste terribly good, even after a couple of beers. Petron figured he shouldn't have gotten drunk, shouldn't have baited those dwarves, and probably shouldn't have come to this part of town for a drink. His head rang, and he was dimly aware of the dwarf's hands rifling through his pack. "What's this, then?" the dwarf said, pulling Petron's knife from his pack. Archmage Anon had given that to him 3 weeks before Dalaran fell. No. Petron bared his teeth, wincing at the road burn on his face, and sat up. The dwarves huddled around his jeweled knife, eagerly discussing how much they could get for it. Their backs were to him. Petron weighed his options. Trying to grab one of the dwarves' weapons hanging from their belts would be death. With full knowledge of what his actions would do to the relations of his people and the dwarves, he concentrated and whispered a few words that aimed his flaming hands at the dwarves. In the chaos that followed, he dashed forward, retrieved the drop knife, and ran into the night. He didn't stay to see if anyone of the dwarves had survived, and was pretty sure he'd caught fire to the pub. He cradled the knife in his palm, muttered something, and melted into the shadows. It might, he reflected, be time to see what life outside Theramore had to offer. And here's what we get with some High Elf knowledge checks. What a character knows about High Elf history and culture depends on his intelligence and training, which a knowledge check represents. A hero who makes an appropriate knowledge check knows the following information about High Elves at the indicated DCs. Alright, so most people with a basic knowledge of history or just local knowledge know that High Elves value arcane magic. Tensions are high between High Elves and Night Elves, and the High Elf homeland Quel'Thalas suffered much in the Third War. Now, a little bit more knowledge of local knowledge, equivalent to those known by most heroes, or a decent chunk of regular people, know that High Elves have a reputation as being haughty. Very few High Elves still exist. Similar knowledge levels in history or local knowledge will tell you that many High Elves adopted the name Blood Elves after the destruction of Quel'Thalas. These dark individuals go to any length to acquire arcane magic. Other High Elves view them with horror. Now, the rare individual with good knowledge in arcana or local knowledge, or a decent chunk of adventurers, know that High Elves are addicted to arcane magic. And a small chunk of experienced adventurers that have knowledge of history or local knowledge know that High Elves were once Night Elves. The Night Elves exiled them 10,000 years ago, and the High Elves eventually founded Quel'Thalas and became their own people. All right, so we'll have another smallish one when we do our next reading, because we're going to do the very brief history of half-elves. But we have another episode in the pipe, 5x5, and as always, I thank you for watching and for listening. I appreciate you, and I look forward to seeing you all next time on Lore of Warcraft.